The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the empty plains of West Texas, its rays unforgiving as Yates Quinn pulled the brim of his worn hat lower to shield his eyes. The year was 1878, and this stretch of lonesome country had become as familiar to him as the feel of his father's old rifle in his hands. He'd been on the trail for 3 days now, driving a small herd back to his modest ranch, when something unusual caught his eye: a splash of faded blue fabric against the golden-brown landscape, wavering like a mirage in the distance. Yates narrowed his eyes, pulling gently on the reins of his horse, Maverick. "Hold up, boy," he murmured, patting the dun stallion's neck. The cattle could wait a moment while he investigated. As he drew closer, the shape took form: a woman, her dress dusty from travel, one hand clutching her swollen belly as she stumbled forward on the barren trail. Before he could call out to her, she swayed dangerously, her knees buckling beneath her weight. Yates spurred Maverick forward, covering the distance between them in seconds, dismounting with practiced ease just as the woman collapsed. He caught her before she hit the ground, surprised by how light she felt despite her pregnant condition. Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, gently lowering her to the ground and keeping her head shaded with his body. Her face was flushed with heat, lips parched and cracked from dehydration. Yates reached for his canteen, carefully lifting her head to help her drink. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of summer sage. Confusion and fear crossed her face as she tried to focus on him. "It's all right," Yates assured her, his voice gentle. "I'm not going to hurt you. You've been out in this heat too long." She accepted a small sip of water, coughing weakly. "My baby," she whispered, her hand protectively covering her rounded belly. "Your baby will be fine," Yates said with more confidence than he felt. "My ranch is just over that ridge. Come on now, you're almost home." The woman's eyes widened slightly at his words before she slipped back into unconsciousness. Yates didn't waste any time. He gathered her in his arms and mounted Maverick with some difficulty, positioning her carefully across his lap. The cattle would have to find their own way back. This woman needed help immediately. As he rode toward his ranch, he studied her face. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with features that might have been striking if not marred by exhaustion and sun exposure. Her dark hair was coming loose from a once neat bun, and the simple blue dress she wore had seen better days. There was no ring on her finger and no sign of companions or belongings nearby. Whoever she was, she'd been traveling alone, a dangerous proposition for anyone in these parts, let alone a woman in her condition. "Hold on," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him. "Just hold on." The rocking Q Ranch came into view as Yates crested the final hill. It wasn't much compared to some of the grander spreads in the territory, just a modest house, a barn and a few outbuildings, but it was his, earned through years of hard work after returning from the war. He spurred Maverick into a canter, calling out as they approached the house. "Mrs. Winters, Mrs. Winters, I need help." The door to the main house flew open, and a stout woman in her 60s appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. Martha Winters had been Yates's housekeeper since he'd established the ranch 5 years ago, and there wasn't a crisis she couldn't handle. "Lord Almighty," she exclaimed, hurrying down the porch steps as Yates carefully dismounted with the unconscious woman. "Where'd you find her?" "About 3 miles out, alone on the trail. She's with child and suffering from the heat," Yates explained, carrying his burden toward the house. "She needs water and rest and probably a doctor." "Get her inside," Mrs. Winters instructed, already moving ahead to open doors. "The spare bedroom, I'll fetch water and clean linens." Yates carried the woman into the modest guest room and laid her gently on the bed. Mrs. Winters returned quickly with a basin of water and clean cloths. "You send Hank for Doc Peterson right away," she ordered, referring to Yates's ranch hand. "And then you make yourself scarce. This isn't a matter for a man's eyes." Yates nodded, reluctant to leave but knowing Mrs. Winters was right. He cast one last glance at the woman on the bed before striding out to find Hank. Within the hour, Doc Peterson arrived, his medical bag in hand and his expression grave as Yates explained the situation. "Found her out on the trail, you say?" The doctor asked, removing his hat as he entered the house. Yes, sir, all alone, about to faint dead away in the sun. The doctor shook his head. Foolish to be traveling in her condition, especially in this heat. Let me see what we're dealing with. Yates paced the front porch while the doctor examined his unexpected guest. The cattle had found their way back to the ranch, guided by instinct and thirst, and Hank had seen to penning them. Now there was nothing to do but wait and wonder who this woman was and what circumstances had brought her to this desperate state. Nearly an hour passed before Doc Peterson emerged from the house, closing the door behind him. Well, Yates asked, standing quickly. She's stable, the doctor said, setting his bag down. Suffering from heat exhaustion and dehydration, but I believe she'll recover with proper care. The baby seems unharmed, though I'll want to check again when she's more alert. She's about 7 months along by my estimation. Did she say anything? Tell you who she is or where she's from? She was conscious briefly. Said her name is Delia Lawson, but not much else before she drifted off again. Mrs. Winters is sitting with her now. The doctor studied Yates thoughtfully. You did right by bringing her here, Quinn. Another hour in that sun, and we might be having a very different conversation. Yates nodded, feeling a strange sense of responsibility toward the woman Delia. What does she need? Rest, plenty of fluids, and good food when she can manage it. I've left some powders with Mrs. Winters for fever. I'll come back tomorrow to check on her. The doctor picked up his bag and placed his hat back on his head. And Quinn, whatever her story is, I suspect it's not a happy one. A woman in her condition, traveling alone in these parts, well, just tread carefully. After seeing the doctor off, Yates returned to the house. Mrs. Winters was in the kitchen, preparing a broth for when Delia woke. How is she? He asked. Sleeping peacefully now, Mrs. Winters replied, stirring the pot. Poor thing's been through something terrible, that's clear enough. Her hands are soft, not a working woman's hands, but her dress is plain as can be. And no wedding ring, though there's a mark where one might have been. Yates frowned. You think she's running from something or someone? I wouldn't speculate, Mrs. Winters said, though her tone suggested she already had. But a respectable woman doesn't find herself in her situation without a story behind it. When she wakes, we'll know more. It was nearly dusk when Mrs. Winters came to find Yates in the barn, where he'd been busying himself with chores to keep his mind occupied. She's awake and asking for you, the housekeeper said. Says she wants to thank the man who saved her life. Yates set down the saddle he'd been repairing and wiped his hands on a cloth. Did she say anything else? Not much. Seems confused about where exactly she is, but lucid enough. I've given her some broth and water. Mrs. Winters fixed him with a stern look. Don't tire her out with questions, you hear? She needs rest more than interrogation. When Yates entered the spare bedroom, Delia Lawson was propped up against the pillows, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. The color had returned somewhat to her cheeks, and those sage-green eyes were alert as they tracked his entrance. Miss Lawson, he said, removing his hat and standing awkwardly at the foot of the bed. I'm Yates Quinn. This is my ranch you're resting at. Mr. Quinn, she replied, her voice soft but steady. Mrs. Winters tells me you found me on the trail. I owe you my gratitude and my life. No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. We both know that's not true, especially in these parts. She placed a hand on her belly, a protective gesture that seemed unconscious. You could have passed by, or worse. Instead, you brought me to safety. Yates shifted uncomfortably under her grateful gaze. You shouldn't have been out there alone, Miss Lawson. It's dangerous country for a solitary traveler, even more so for a woman in my condition, she finished when he faltered. Yes, I'm aware of the impropriety. Believe me, Mr. Quinn, I wouldn't have undertaken such a journey if I'd had any alternative. Her words hung in the air between them, an invitation to ask for details she might not be ready to give. Yates cleared his throat. Well, you're welcome to stay here until you're recovered enough to travel, though I'd advise waiting until after the baby comes. We're simple folk, but you'll have shelter, food, and safety. Surprise flickered across her face. You'd extend such hospitality to a stranger. My mother raised me better than to turn away someone in need, Yates replied simply. Besides, the nearest town is 20 miles away, and the accommodations there are hardly suitable for a lady. Delia studied him for a long moment, as if trying to discern his true motivations. Whatever she saw in his face must have reassured her, because she finally nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn. I won't impose on your kindness any longer than necessary." "It's no imposition," he assured her. "Now you should rest. We can talk more tomorrow when you're feeling stronger." As Yates turned to leave, her voice stopped him at the door. "Mr. Quinn, may I ask where exactly I've found myself?" "Rocking Q Ranch, about 50 miles northeast of El Paso." She nodded, a small frown creasing her brow. "And the date, if you wouldn't mind." "June 18th, 1878. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes distant. "That's helpful to know." Yates left her to her thoughts, puzzled by the exchange but mindful of Mrs. Winters's warning not to press for information. Whatever had driven Delia Lawson to risk her life and her child's by traveling alone across the Texas wilderness? She would share in her own time if she chose to share at all. Over the next 3 days, Delia regained her strength gradually. By the fourth morning, she insisted on getting out of bed, despite Mrs. Winters's protests. Yates found her sitting on the front porch in a rocking chair, wrapped in a quilt despite the warm morning air, watching the daily activities of the ranch with evident interest. "Good morning, Miss Lawson," he greeted her, surprised to see her up. "Should you be out of bed?" "I've imposed on your hospitality while lying down quite enough, Mr. Quinn," she replied with a faint smile. "Besides, the fresh air does me good after being cooped up inside." Yates settled into the chair beside her. "Mrs. Winters tells me you're eating better." "Yes, though she seems determined to fatten me up like a prize hen." Delia smoothed a hand over her belly. "Not that we need much help in that department." The casual reference to her condition made Yates uncomfortable, but he tried not to show it. "Doc Peterson will be by again today. He'll be pleased to see you up and about." Delia nodded, her gaze drifting to the distant mountains. "Mr. Quinn, I realize I've told you very little about myself or how I came to be in such a predicament. You don't owe me any explanations, Miss Lawson. Perhaps not, but I owe you honesty." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "I was traveling to San Francisco, where I have a distant cousin. I had to leave my home in St. Louis rather suddenly." Yates remained silent, giving her space to continue if she wished. "The father of my child was a married man," Delia said quietly, her cheeks coloring slightly. "A respected businessman in the community. When he discovered my condition, he offered money for me to take care of the problem discreetly. When I refused, the offer changed to a one-way ticket to anywhere far from St. Louis, along with enough money to start over." "And you chose San Francisco," Yates supplied when she paused. "I had limited options. My parents are deceased, and the rest of my family would sooner disown me than help me in my disgrace. My cousin Catherine is the only one who might take me in. She has something of a scandalous past herself." Delia's fingers twisted in the quilt. "I was on the stagecoach, but we were robbed 2 days before you found me. The bandits took everything of value, including my ticket and money. The other passengers, the driver, they continued on after the robbery. I was encouraged to find my own way after they discovered my condition wasn't the result of a proper marriage." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Yates could sense the hurt beneath her composure. "I started walking, thinking I might reach a town where I could send a telegram to Catherine, but I underestimated the distance and the heat." Anger flashed through Yates. "They left a pregnant woman alone in the wilderness. What kind of men would do such a thing?" "The kind that value respectability over compassion, Mr. Quinn." Delia's gaze was steady. "The same kind you'll find in most civilized places." Yates found himself at a loss for words. The cruelty of abandoning her to almost certain death was beyond his comprehension. "I understand if my situation makes you uncomfortable," Delia continued after a moment. "Society has clear opinions about women like me. Once I'm well enough, I'll find a way to continue my journey without further imposing on you." "That's not necessary," Yates said quickly. "What happened to you was wrong, and I meant what I said about staying until the baby comes. This isn't exactly civilized society out here, Miss Lawson. We judge people by their actions, not by mistakes or misfortunes." gratitude and relief washed over her face. "You're a rare man, Mr. Quinn." "Not so rare in these parts," he replied with a slight smile. "Just practical. No one survives out here without helping their neighbors when trouble comes." Delia returned his smile, and something shifted between them, a tentative understanding, perhaps even the beginning of friendship. As they sat in comfortable silence watching the morning activity of the ranch, Yates realized that the mysterious woman he'd found in the desert had begun to occupy more of his thoughts than was entirely proper. But as she'd pointed out, propriety held different weight in the frontier, and he found himself grateful for that fact. Doc Peterson's visit that afternoon confirmed what they already knew: Delia was recovering well, though still in need of rest and care. The baby, too, seemed to be developing normally despite the mother's ordeal. "You're a fortunate young woman," the doctor told Delia as he packed up his instruments. "Another day out in that heat, and we might have lost you both." "I'm well aware of my debt to Mr. Quinn," Delia replied, casting a grateful glance at Yates, who stood awkwardly by the door. "Well, keep resting and eating Mrs. Winters's cooking, and you should be ready for that little one in about 8 weeks by my calculation." The doctor turned to Yates. "I'll stop by again next week, sooner if you need me." After the doctor left, Mrs. Winters insisted Delia return to bed for a rest. Yates retreated to the barn, where he could lose himself in physical labor while sorting through his conflicted thoughts. He'd never anticipated having a pregnant, unmarried woman under his roof, much less one whose quiet dignity and resilience increasingly drew his admiration. Propriety demanded distance, yet he found himself seeking reasons to check on her, to engage her in conversation, to see that rare smile light up her face. "You're walking a dangerous path, Quinn," he muttered to himself as he forked hay into the stalls. Getting involved with Delia Lawson's troubles could only lead to complications he didn't need. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to regret offering her shelter. That evening, after supper, Delia joined Yates on the porch again. The sunset painted the sky in vivid oranges and purples, and a cool breeze offered relief from the day's heat. "It's beautiful here," Delia remarked, settling into the rocking chair with more ease than she had that morning. "Different from the landscape I'm used to, but beautiful in its own way." "Takes some getting used to," Yates agreed. "When I first came here after the war, I thought it was the loneliest place on earth. Now I can't imagine living anywhere else." "You fought in the war?" she asked, glancing at him with interest. Yates nodded. "Confederate side, though not by choice. Texas seceded, and I was of fighting age. Spent most of my service in Louisiana and Mississippi, not something I care to remember much." "I was just a child when it ended," Delia said softly, "but I remember the soldiers coming home, those who did come home. Many looked like they'd left parts of themselves on the battlefield, even when they returned with all their limbs." "That's an accurate way of putting it," Yates agreed, impressed by her perception. "When it was over, I couldn't go back to my family's farm near Dallas. Too many memories, too many neighbors who didn't come back, so I drifted west until I found this place. And built all this yourself, had help, of course. Hank's been with me since the beginning, and Mrs. Winters came along when her husband passed 3 years ago. It's small compared to some spreads, but it's enough." "It's impressive," Delia said sincerely. "You should be proud of what you've created here." Her praise warmed him unexpectedly. "What about you? What was your life like before your circumstances changed?" Delia sighed, her hand moving to her belly in that now familiar protective gesture. "Unremarkable, really. My father was a clerk at a mercantile store, my mother a seamstress. They provided a comfortable, if modest, life. I was educated, taught to play the piano, trained in all the skills a young woman needs to make a suitable match." A hint of bitterness crept into her voice. "I was working as a governess for a wealthy family when I met the baby's father. He was charming, sophisticated, and very convincing in his unhappiness with his wife. He took advantage of you," Yates said, unable to keep the edge from his tone. "Perhaps, but I wasn't entirely naive. I knew he was married, knew what we were doing was wrong." She looked down at her hands. "I just didn't realize the consequences would fall entirely on my shoulders while he continued his respectable life as if nothing had happened." That seems to be the way of things, Yates observed. Not fair, but common enough. Yes, well, life rarely concerns itself with fairness. Delia's voice was pragmatic rather than self-pitying. I've made peace with my situation. This child didn't ask to be born into complicated circumstances, but I intend to give it the best life I can, regardless of what society thinks. Her determination impressed him. Many women in her position might have taken the money offered to solve the problem or given the baby up once it arrived. Instead, Delia Lawson was facing her future with courage, prepared to endure judgment and hardship for the sake of her child. Your little one is lucky to have such a mother, Yates said quietly. Delia looked at him in surprise, as though expecting judgment rather than approval. Thank you, Mr. Quinn, that's kind of you to say. They fell into companionable silence as darkness settled over the ranch. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonely howl echoing across the plains. I should let you rest, Yates said finally, rising from his chair. Mrs. Winters will have my hide if I keep you up late. Delia smiled at that. She's quite protective, isn't she? Always has been. Raised 5 children of her own, so she knows a thing or two about taking care. He hesitated at the door. Good night, Miss Lawson. Delia, please, she said softly. After all you've done for me, I think we can dispense with formalities. Yates nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. Good night, Delia. I'll see you in the morning. Good night, Yates. His name on her lips followed him into the house, settling in his thoughts as he prepared for bed. It was a complication he hadn't anticipated when he'd spotted that blue dress against the barren landscape, this growing affection for a woman who would, by her own admission, continue her journey as soon as she was able. Yates tried to remind himself that her stay was temporary, that she had plans that didn't include him or his ranch. But as sleep claimed him, he couldn't help but wonder if those plans might change, given time. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. As Delia's strength returned, she insisted on making herself useful around the ranch. Mrs. Winters reluctantly allowed her to help with simple cooking tasks and mending, though she drew the line at more strenuous chores. I'm pregnant, not made of porcelain, Delia protested one morning as the older woman shooed her away from the laundry. And you'll remain in good health that way, Mrs. Winters replied firmly. Doctor's orders, light duties only until that baby arrives. Yates found himself looking forward to evenings when they would sit on the porch, talking as the day cooled. Delia was well-read and thoughtful, with opinions on everything from politics to literature. She had a quick wit that surprised him and a laugh that made something warm unfurl in his chest whenever he heard it. For her part, Delia seemed equally interested in Yates's life and experiences. She listened attentively as he explained the workings of the ranch, asked insightful questions about his plans for expansion, and offered occasional suggestions that revealed a practical mind behind her refined manners. Have you considered raising sheep as well as cattle? She asked one evening as they discussed the challenges of the latest drought. I've read that they're hardier in dry conditions and can graze on land that cattle find less palatable. Yates raised an eyebrow. Been reading agricultural journals in your spare time, have you? There was a copy of the Farmer's Almanac in the bedroom, she admitted with a smile. I've had ample time to read while resting. Well, you're not wrong about the sheep, but cattle ranchers and sheepmen don't traditionally mix well in these parts. There's been blood spilled over less. Tradition shouldn't stand in the way of sound business, Delia argued. If diversifying your livestock would help you weather poor seasons, isn't that worth considering? Yates found himself chuckling. You make a compelling case, counselor. I'll give it some thought. These conversations gradually expanded beyond the practicalities of ranching. Yates told her about his childhood in East Texas, about the parents he'd lost to fever while he was away at war, about his dreams for the rocking Q. Delia shared memories of St. Louis, stories of the children she had taught, and her hopes for the baby growing within her. I think it's a girl, she confided one evening in late July, her hand resting on her now prominent belly. Just a feeling I have. Do you have a name chosen? Yates asked, curious. Elizabeth, after my mother, Delia's expression softened. She would have been disappointed in my choices, but she wouldn't have abandoned me, and she would have loved her grandchild regardless of the circumstances. And if it's a boy, Delia hesitated. I hadn't given it as much thought. Perhaps Thomas after my father. Both fine names, Yates agreed. He watched her profile in the fading light, struck again by how natural her presence on his porch had come to feel. Have you written to your cousin in San Francisco to let her know you're safe? The question had been on his mind for some time. If Delia was still planning to continue her journey after the baby's birth, she would need her cousin's support. I sent a letter last week when Hank went to town for supplies, she admitted. I thought it prudent to inform her of my delay and current situation. Of course, Yates said, trying to mask his disappointment. It was the sensible thing to do, after all. I hope she responds quickly to ease your mind. Yes, although... Delia trailed off, seeming to choose her words carefully. I find myself less anxious about the future than I was when you found me. These weeks at the rocking queue have been healing in more ways than one. Her words hung between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Yates found himself at a crossroads. He could acknowledge the growing attachment between them, or he could maintain the cautious distance that propriety and good sense dictated. Before he could decide, a sharp intake of breath from Delia broke the moment. Oh. She exclaimed, her hand moving to the side of her belly. What is it? Are you unwell? Yates asked, instantly alert. A smile spread across Delia's face. No, just a particularly enthusiastic kick. Here. Without thinking, she reached for his hand and placed it on her belly. Yates froze at the intimate contact, but then he felt it a definite thump against his palm, strong and determined. That's remarkable, he said quietly, awed by the tangible evidence of the new life within her. It is, isn't it? Delia agreed, her voice soft. No matter what else happens, this child is a miracle. My miracle. For a fleeting moment, with his hand on her belly feeling the baby move, Yates allowed himself to imagine a different reality, one where the child was his. Where Delia had come to the rocking queue not as a desperate stranger, but as his wife. Where their evenings on the porch stretched into years rather than weeks. The thought both frightened and exhilarated him. When Delia finally removed his hand, her cheeks were flushed. I'm sorry, that was terribly forward of me. No need to apologize, Yates assured her, though his own face felt warm. It's a wonder feeling new life that way. An awkward silence fell between them, the easy companionship of moments before replaced by an awareness of boundaries crossed, however innocently. I should retire for the night, Delia said after a moment. The baby seems to be most active when I should be sleeping. Yates stood to help her from her chair, careful to offer only his arm for support. Rest well, Delia. She paused at the door, looking back at him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. Good night, Yates, and thank you. For what? For making me feel like a person worthy of respect, not just a woman who made a mistake. Before he could respond, she disappeared inside, leaving him alone with his increasingly complicated feelings and the lingering warmth where her hand had rested on his. The following morning, Hank returned from another supply run to town with a telegram for Delia. Yates brought it to her as she sat in the kitchen helping Mrs. Winters shell peas. From San Francisco, he said, handing her the envelope. Arrived yesterday, according to the operator. Delia's fingers trembled slightly as she accepted it. Thank you. I'll leave you to read it in privacy, Yates offered, turning to go. No, please stay, Delia said quickly. It concerns my future plans, which affect your hospitality as well, Mrs. Winters discreetly removed herself from the kitchen, muttering about checking the laundry. Yates sat across from Delia as she opened the telegram and read the brief message inside. Her face remained impassive, but he noticed her shoulders slump slightly. Is everything all right? He asked when she set the paper down. My cousin Catherine has remarried and relocated to Portland, Delia explained. She expresses sympathy for my situation, but explains that her new husband's position in society precludes them from taking in, how did she phrase it? A relative in compromising circumstances. Her attempt at a smile didn't reach her eyes. It seems I've overestimated the reach of familial obligation. I'm sorry, Delia, Yates said, genuinely troubled by this new development. That's a difficult blow. Yes, well, I should have anticipated it. Catherine's scandalous past was limited to an elopement with a man her parents disapproved of, not an illegitimate child. Delia folded the telegram carefully and tucked it into her pocket. I seem to be running short on options. Yates hesitated, then spoke the words that had been forming in his mind for days. You could stay here. Delia looked up sharply. I've already imposed far longer than I intended, not as an imposition, Yates interrupted, his heart racing. As a choice. The ranch needs a woman's touch, and you've proven yourself capable and hardworking. Mrs. Winters isn't getting any younger, and she's mentioned wanting to spend more time with her daughter in Denver. Are you offering me employment, Mr. Quinn? Delia asked, her tone unreadable. I'm offering you a home, he clarified, meeting her gaze steadily. For you and your child, no questions asked, no judgment passed. Why would you do that? You barely know me. I know enough, Yates said simply. I know you're intelligent, resourceful, and braver than most men I've met. I know you're devoted to your child's welfare above your own comfort or reputation. And I know that in the weeks you've been here, this place has felt more like a home than it ever did before. Delia's eyes widened at his candor. Yates, I don't know what to say. You don't have to decide now, he assured her. The offer stands, whatever you choose to do after the baby comes. I just wanted you to know that you have options beyond continuing a journey that's already proven dangerous. It's incredibly generous, she said softly. But have you considered what people would say? A single woman with a child living on your ranch. It would cause talk even out here. Let them talk, Yates replied with a shrug. I've never much cared for gossip. Besides, arrangements could be made to satisfy propriety if that's your concern. The implication hung in the air between them. Delia's cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. I need time to think, she said finally. This isn't a decision to make lightly, especially with the baby coming so soon. Take all the time you need, Yates assured her, rising from his seat. Nothing needs to be decided today. As he left the kitchen, Yates felt lighter despite the uncertainty. He'd spoken truths he'd been avoiding for weeks, that Delia's presence had transformed the rocking queue from a place he owned to a place that felt like home, that he cared for her well beyond the obligation of a rescuer to the rescued, that he could imagine a future with her and her child as part of his life. Whether she would or could reciprocate those feelings remained to be seen. But at least now the possibility existed, hanging like a star on the horizon, distant, perhaps, but bright with promise. August arrived with relentless heat that baked the earth and tested both livestock and humans. Delia grew increasingly uncomfortable as her pregnancy advanced, but she bore the discomfort with characteristic grace. Doc Peterson's visits became more frequent as her time drew nearer, and he seemed pleased with her progress, despite the inauspicious beginning to his acquaintance with her. Another 3 weeks, give or take, he pronounced after examining her in early August. The little one has settled into the right position and everything appears normal. The news brought both relief and a new tension to the household. Delia had yet to give Yates a definitive answer about staying at the ranch, though their evening conversations continued, now weighted with unspoken possibilities. On a particularly stifling evening, with the air so heavy it seemed to press down upon them, Delia joined Yates on the porch as usual. Her movements were slow and deliberate as she lowered herself into the rocking chair. Doc Peterson says I'm as big as a barn, she remarked with a wry smile, though he couched it in more medical terminology. You look beautiful, Yates said without thinking. Delia's eyes widened slightly at the compliment. That's very kind, though I suspect your eyesight might be failing. My vision is perfectly sound, he assured her, holding her gaze until she looked away, a flush rising to her cheeks. I've been thinking about your offer, Delia said after a moment, changing the subject. About staying here after the baby comes. Yates's heart quickened, and I'm inclined to accept with certain conditions. Name them, he said immediately. Delia smoothed her hands over her belly, gathering her thoughts. I would need to contribute meaningfully, not just be a charity case. I could teach your ranch hands children, perhaps. I noticed several families living in the smaller cabins. We have 5 children on the property currently, ages 6 to 12, Yates confirmed. No formal education available for 50 miles. Their parents would be grateful. And I would need my own space, a small cabin, perhaps, where the baby and I could have some independence while still being part of the ranch. The old foreman's cabin could be fixed up, Yates suggested. It's not large, but it's sturdy and close to the main house. Hank and I could have it ready before the baby arrives. Delia nodded, seeming pleased with his quick solutions. And one more thing, Yates, I would need honesty between us about expectations, about feelings. She met his eyes directly. I won't enter into another situation where unspoken understandings lead to pain. Yates felt his mouth go dry. This was territory far more challenging than practical arrangements about housing and employment. Honesty, then, he agreed, taking a deep breath. I'll start. I care for you, Delia. More than I expected to when I found you on that trail. I admire your strength, your intelligence, your dignity in the face of difficult circumstances. I enjoy your company more than anyone I've known in years. Delia's eyes shone in the gathering twilight, and the baby. My child will always be my priority, Yates. I come with responsibilities that can't be set aside. I understand that. I would never ask otherwise. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. I don't have experience with children, but I'm willing to learn, to help if you'll let me. You're offering quite a lot to someone you've known for less than 2 months, Delia observed, though her tone was gentle rather than accusatory. Sometimes clarity comes quickly, Yates replied simply. I spent years after the war drifting, uncertain of my place in the world. When I found this land, I knew within days it was where I belonged. I feel the same certainty about you, Delia. A tear slipped down her cheek, which she quickly wiped away. You make it sound so simple. It can be, if we allow it to be. Yates reached across the space between them, offering his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Delia placed her hand in his, her fingers cool against his sun-warmed skin. Then I accept your offer, she said softly, for myself and for my child. Yates felt a surge of joy, tempered by respect for her courage in trusting him. We'll take things slowly, he promised, one day at a time. Delia's response was interrupted by a sharp intake of breath. Her hand tightened around his almost painfully. Delia, what is it? I'm not sure, she said, her voice strained. A pain sharper than the usual discomforts. Concern flooded through Yates. Should I fetch Mrs. Winters? Perhaps it's nothing, Delia began, then gasped again, her free hand clutching her belly. Or perhaps not. Yes, I think Mrs. Winters would be wise. Yates helped her inside, calling for the housekeeper with barely concealed alarm. Mrs. Winters appeared from the kitchen, took one look at Delia's face, and immediately took charge. Help her to her room, she instructed Yates. Then send Hank for the doctor. And after that, make yourself useful elsewhere. This is women's business now. Yates did as he was told, though leaving Delia was the last thing he wanted to do. As he helped her to her bedroom, another pain seized her, and she leaned heavily against him. It's too early, she whispered, fear evident in her voice. The doctor said 3 more weeks. Babies come when they decide to, Mrs. Winters said practically, already turning down the bed, and first ones often arrive on their own schedule. Now, Mr. Quinn, off with you. We'll manage from here. Reluctantly, Yates left to find Hank. The ranch hand was already saddling a horse when Yates reached the barn, alerted by the unusual commotion in the house. Miss Lawson's time has come early, Yates explained tersely. Ride for Doc Peterson, fast as you can. Yes, sir, Hank replied, swinging into the saddle. Should be back before midnight if he's home. As Hank galloped away, Yates found himself at loose ends, torn between respecting the traditional exclusion of men from the birthing chamber and his desperate need to know Delia was all right. He settled for pacing the front porch, pausing at every sound from within the house. The hours crawled by. Night fell, bringing little relief from the heat. Yates built a fire behind the barn, an old tradition his mother had taught him, meant to light the way for new life entering the world. It was superstition, perhaps, but it gave him something to do besides worry. Just before midnight, Mrs. Winters appeared on the porch. Yates rushed to meet her, heart in his throat. She's doing well, the housekeeper assured him. The pains are coming regular now, but there's still time before the baby arrives. No sign of the doctor yet, not yet, Yates replied, anxiety sharpening his tone. Should I go after him and leave us here alone? No, better to wait. I've delivered my share of babies in my time, Mrs. Winters patted his arm. She's asking for you, though it's not customary. Just a few minutes, mind. She needs her strength. Yates followed Mrs. Winters into the house and down the hall to Delia's room. He hesitated at the threshold, suddenly uncertain. Go on, Mrs. Winters urged. I'll be back shortly with more hot water. The room was dimly lit by oil lamps, the curtains drawn against the night. Delia lay on the bed, her hair damp with perspiration, her face flushed with exertion. When she saw him, she attempted a smile. I'm sorry about this. Unexpected change of plans, she said, her voice weaker than he'd ever heard it. Yates moved to her bedside, taking her outstretched hand. Nothing to apologize for. How are you feeling? Terrified, she admitted. Excited, in pain, everything at once. You're the strongest person I know, Yates told her, meaning every word. You can do this. Will you? Delia broke off as another contraction seized her. Her grip on his hand tightened painfully, and she closed her eyes, breathing through the pain as Mrs. Winters had clearly instructed her to do. When it passed, she opened her eyes again. Will you stay nearby? Not in here, I know that's not proper, but close. Wild horses couldn't drag me away, Yates promised. I'll be right outside if you need anything. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, Yates, whatever happens tonight. Thank you for finding me that day. The emotion in her voice struck him to the core. Best thing I ever did, he said simply. Mrs. Winters returned then, shooing Yates out with stern efficiency. Back on the porch, he resumed his vigil, every cry from within the house cutting him like a knife. He prayed something he hadn't done with any regularity since the war for Delia's safety and the baby's. Around 2 in the morning, the sound of hooves announced Hank's return with Doc Peterson. The doctor wasted no time, hurrying into the house with his medical bag. Yates intercepted him at the door. How is she progressing? The doctor asked, all business, steadily, according to Mrs. Winters. The pains are close together now, the doctor nodded. Good, first babies often take their time, but it sounds like this one is eager to meet the world. He clapped Yates on the shoulder. Try not to wear a hole in your porch, Quinn. These things happen in their own time. With that, he disappeared into the house, leaving Yates to his worried thoughts again. The night seemed endless. Yates kept the fire burning, watched the stars wheel overhead, and listened to the sounds from the house, Delia's cries growing more frequent and intense. The murmur of voices as Mrs. Winters and Doc Peterson worked together. Finally, as the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, a new sound pierced the night, the thin, angry wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Yates froze, his heart pounding. The cry came again, stronger this time, full of indignation and life. He sank onto the porch steps, overcome with emotion. The baby had arrived safely, but what of Delia? The minutes stretched agonizingly until the front door finally opened and Doc Peterson stepped out, wiping his hands on a cloth. Congratulations, Quinn, he said, a smile breaking through his professional demeanor. Mother and daughter are both doing well. Daughter, Yates repeated, a strange feeling of joy spreading through him. It's a girl. A healthy little girl with a fine set of lungs, as you've no doubt heard, the doctor confirmed. 6 pounds even, which is excellent for an early arrival. And Delia, exhausted but well, no complications, which is a blessing, she's a strong woman. Relief washed over Yates like a cool rain after drought. Can I see them? Give Mrs. Winters a few minutes to get them settled, then yes, a brief visit would be acceptable. The doctor studied Yates thoughtfully. You seem quite invested in Miss Lawson's welfare, Quinn. She'll be staying on at the ranch, Yates replied simply, teaching the children and helping Mrs. Winters. I see, the doctor said, his tone neutral but his eyes knowing. Well, she couldn't ask for a safer place to raise her child, that's certain. He gathered his belongings. I'll return tomorrow to check on them both. Send for me immediately if anything changes before then. After the doctor left, Yates waited impatiently until Mrs. Winters appeared at the door, her severe expression softened by the events of the night. "You can come in now," she said. "But only for a few minutes. They both need rest." Yates entered the room to find Delia propped up against the pillows, her face pale but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he approached, and the smile she gave him made his breath catch. "Yates," she said softly. "Come meet Elizabeth." He moved to the bedside, looking down at the tiny face nestled among the blankets. The baby was flushed pink, with a surprising amount of dark hair and delicate features that somehow already hinted at her mother's beauty. "She's perfect," Yates said, his voice rough with emotion. "Would you like to hold her?" Delia asked. Yates hesitated. "I've never held a baby before. I wouldn't want to. You won't break her," Delia assured him. "Here, sit beside me." He perched carefully on the edge of the bed, and Delia gently transferred the swaddled infant into his arms. Elizabeth squirmed slightly but didn't wake, her tiny fingers curled into fists beside her face. "Hello, Elizabeth," Yates whispered, overwhelmed by the trust Delia was placing in him and by the unexpected surge of protectiveness he felt toward this tiny being who had entered the world so dramatically. "Welcome to the rocking queue." Delia's hand came to rest on his arm, and when he looked at her, he saw tears in her eyes. "I meant what I said earlier," she told him. "Thank you for finding us that day, for saving both our lives." "Thank you for staying," Yates replied, "for making this place feel like a home at last." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken promises and possibilities. Then Elizabeth stirred, her face scrunching as she prepared to voice her displeasure at being disturbed. "I think someone's hungry again," Delia said, reaching for her daughter. Yates carefully returned the baby to her mother's arms. "I'll let you both rest," he said, standing. "Is there anything you need?" Delia looked up at him, her expression open and vulnerable in a way he'd never seen before. "Just time," she said softly. "Time for all of us to become what we might be to each other." "We have all the time in the world," Yates assured her. "Rest now. I'll be nearby when you wake." As he left the room, closing the door quietly behind him, Yates felt as though he had crossed an invisible threshold into a future brighter than any he had dared to imagine when he'd spotted that blue dress against the barren landscape 2 months ago. The ranch felt different now, alive with new possibilities. A family had begun here in the most unexpected way, and Yates was determined to nurture it with the same care and patience he'd devoted to building the rocking queue from empty land into a thriving ranch. One day at a time, he reminded himself. The journey ahead might not be easy, but they would travel it together, the cowboy, the brave mother, and the tiny daughter who had brought them together. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Elizabeth thrived under her mother's devoted care and the doting attention of Mrs. Winters, who proclaimed the baby the healthiest she'd seen in years, despite her early arrival. Yates threw himself into preparing the foreman's cabin as he'd promised. He and Hank replaced the roof, repaired the windows, and built new furniture to make the modest structure a comfortable home for Delia and Elizabeth. Mrs. Winters contributed curtains and quilts, transforming the bachelor quarters into a cozy cottage. Delia recovered her strength quickly, eager to establish the routine of her new life. By the time Elizabeth was a month old, she had already gathered the ranch children for preliminary lessons 3 mornings a week, with the baby sleeping nearby in a cradle Yates had built himself. Their relationship progressed cautiously but steadily. Yates was careful not to press Delia, mindful that she was adjusting to motherhood while also creating a new life for herself at the ranch. Their evening conversations on the porch continued, now with Elizabeth often nestled in her mother's arms. "The children are bright," Delia remarked one evening in late September as they watched the sunset. "Particularly little Maria, she has a natural gift for mathematics that's quite remarkable." "Her father will be pleased to hear that," Yates replied. "Manuel has ambitions for his children beyond ranch work. As he should. There's no reason they can't have choices their parents didn't." Delia adjusted the sleeping Elizabeth against her shoulder. "That's what I want for her, choices, opportunities, the freedom to become whoever she's meant to be. She'll have all that and more," Yates assured her. "The rocking queue might be remote, but it doesn't have to be limiting." No, it doesn't, Delia agreed, giving him a warm smile. I'm discovering that daily. A comfortable silence fell between them as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Yates found himself thinking of the future, not just the next season or the next year, but many years ahead. He could see Elizabeth growing up at the ranch, learning to ride, helping with the animals, sitting on this very porch listening to stories of how her mother had arrived like a miracle in the desert heat. The cabin is ready whenever you are, he said, breaking the silence, though there's no rush. You're welcome in the main house as long as you prefer, Delia nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps next week, when Elizabeth is a bit stronger for the move. It's kind of you to have put so much work into it. It was the least I could do. Yates hesitated, then continued. I was thinking we might plant some flowers around it come spring, make it truly yours. I'd like that, Delia said softly. It's been a long time since I had a place that felt like it belonged to me. The wistfulness in her voice emboldened Yates. Delia, I know we agreed to take things slowly, and I respect that, but I want you to know that my feelings for you have only grown stronger these past months. She turned to look at him, her expression serious but not closed. Mine as well, she admitted. Despite everything, or perhaps because of everything, I find myself caring for you in ways I didn't expect. May I call on you properly then? Yates asked. Court you as you deserve to be courted. A smile bloomed across Delia's face, transforming her in the fading light. I would like that very much, Yates Quinn. He reached across the space between their chairs and took her free hand in his. I won't rush you, he promised. We have time to do this right. Yes, she agreed, squeezing his hand, we have time. As autumn settled over the ranch, bringing cooler days and the first hints of winter to come, Delia and Elizabeth moved into their cabin. It stood close enough to the main house to be convenient, but separate enough to give Delia the independence she valued. Yates found himself inventing reasons to visit throughout the day, bringing fresh milk from the morning milking, delivering mail from town, stopping by to report on the day's work. Each time, Delia welcomed him with increasing warmth, and little Elizabeth seemed to recognize his voice, turning her head and waving her tiny fists when he spoke. These simple interactions filled Yates with a contentment he had never known before. Their courtship progressed slowly but steadily. Yates took Delia on proper outings when Mrs. Winters offered to watch the baby picnics by the creek, rides to scenic overlooks, and eventually a trip into town for dinner at the hotel restaurant, where he proudly introduced her to the townsfolk as the rocking Q-Tick's new teacher. There were whispers, of course. A single mother living on a bachelor's ranch couldn't help but cause talk, but Yates's standing in the community and Delia's natural dignity soon silenced the worst of the gossip. The fact that Doc Peterson and his wife openly welcomed her to church services helped considerably, as did Mrs. Winters's fierce defense of that fine young woman who's giving those children an education they'd never get otherwise. By Christmas, it was generally accepted that the rocking Q-Tick's owner was courting the young widow who had come to teach at his ranch. The fiction of widowhood had been Delia's idea, not a lie she was comfortable with, but a practical compromise with a society that would more readily accept a widow with a child than an unwed mother. Someday, when she's old enough to understand, I'll tell Elizabeth the truth, Delia told Yates as they decorated a small pine tree in her cabin on Christmas Eve. I won't build her life on falsehoods, no matter how convenient. She'll understand, Yates assured her, hanging a carved wooden star on a high branch. She'll know her mother did what was necessary to protect her and give her a good life. Delia smiled, lifting Elizabeth from her cradle to show her the decorated tree. At 4 months, the baby was alert and curious, her eyes the same sage green as her mother's, wide with wonder at the candles twinkling among the branches. Her first Christmas, Delia said softly. The first of many happy ones, I hope it will be, Yates promised. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. I have something for you, for both of you, really. Delia looked surprised. We agreed on no gifts until tomorrow. This one couldn't wait, Yates explained, suddenly nervous. Go ahead, open it. Balancing Elizabeth on her hip, Delia unwrapped the package to reveal a small wooden box. When she opened it, she gasped softly. Inside lay a ring, a simple gold band set with a modest diamond flanked by two small emeralds. "It was my mother's," Yates said, his voice rough with emotion. "My father gave it to her when they homesteaded in East Texas, before they had anything else of value. I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right person to give it to." "Yates," Delia whispered, looking from the ring to his face. "Are you? I love you, Delia Lawson," he said, taking the plunge. "I think I started falling in love with you that first day when you opened your eyes and looked at me from the shadow of my hat. I've grown more certain of it every day since." Tears welled in Delia's eyes, but she didn't look away. "And Elizabeth, I love her too," Yates said without hesitation. "How could I not? She's part of you and she's a miracle in her own right. I want to be a father to her in every way that matters. Are you certain?" Delia asked, her voice trembling slightly. "People will talk. They'll count the months and let them talk," Yates interrupted gently. "What matters is what we know, what we feel. I want to build a life with you, Delia, with both of you, if you'll have me." Delia looked down at Elizabeth, who had grabbed a handful of her mother's dress and was watching the proceedings with solemn interest. "What do you think, little one?" she asked softly. "Should we say yes to the man who saved us?" As if in answer, Elizabeth gurgled happily and reached toward Yates with her free hand. Delia laughed, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I believe that's a yes," she said, looking back at Yates. "From both of us." Yates felt a wave of joy so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. He took the ring from its box and, with fingers that weren't entirely steady, slipped it onto Delia's finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. "When?" he asked. "How soon can I make you my wife?" "Spring," Delia suggested, her smile radiant, "when the wildflowers bloom." "It seems fitting, doesn't it? New beginnings, new life. Spring it is," Yates agreed, leaning in to kiss her a gentle, reverent kiss that sealed their promise to each other. Elizabeth, finding herself momentarily ignored, made her displeasure known with an indignant squawk. Yates and Delia broke apart, laughing, and he reached to take the baby from her arms. "Sorry, little one," he said, settling Elizabeth against his chest with increasing confidence. "You'll have to get used to sharing your mother with me." "And I'll have to get used to sharing you with her," Delia observed, her expression tender as she watched them together. "Though I suspect it won't be difficult. You're already wrapped around her tiny finger." "Guilty as charged," Yates admitted, smiling as Elizabeth grabbed onto his shirt with surprising strength. "But I have enough love for both of you, I promise." As they stood there in the warm glow of the Christmas candles, the small cabin seemed to Yates like the richest palace on earth. He had found what men spend lifetimes searching for: a woman to love, a child to cherish, a true home built not of timber and nails but of shared dreams and intertwined hearts. Outside, a light snow began to fall, rare in these parts but not unheard of. The soft, white flakes drifted past the window, transforming the landscape into something magical and new. It seemed a fitting backdrop for this night of promises, this threshold they were crossing together. Delia moved closer, leaning her head against Yates's shoulder as they watched the snow fall, Elizabeth now drowsing contentedly in his arms. "I never could have imagined this," she said softly. "When you found me that day, I was just trying to survive until the next hour, the next minute. I never dared hope for happiness." "I know the feeling," Yates replied. "After the war, I thought I'd lost the capacity for this kind of joy. I was existing, not living, until you—" "Until us," Delia corrected gently, her hand coming to rest over his where he cradled Elizabeth. "All three of us together." "Together," Yates agreed, feeling the words settle into his heart like a cornerstone, solid, immovable, the foundation upon which everything else would be built. They married on a perfect April morning, with wildflowers carpeting the rolling hills around the rocking queue. Doc Peterson performed the ceremony on the front porch of the main house, with Mrs. Winters, Hank, and the other ranch families as witnesses. Elizabeth, now 8 months old and trying to crawl, was held by Mrs. Winters, dressed in a white gown that Delia had painstakingly sewn from her own best petticoat. "I, Yates Quinn, take thee, Delia Marie Lawson, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice steady as he looked into Delia's eyes. To have and to hold from this day forward for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. I, Delia Marie Lawson, take thee, Yates Quinn, to be my lawfully wedded husband, Delia repeated, her voice clear and sure. To have and to hold from this day forward for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. When Doc Peterson pronounced them man and wife, Yates kissed his bride with a tenderness that brought tears to Mrs. Winters's eyes. Then he took Elizabeth from the housekeeper's arms and held her between them, completing their circle. The celebration that followed was simple but joyous, a feast prepared by Mrs. Winters and the ranch wives, music provided by Manuel on his battered fiddle, dancing on the packed earth of the yard as the spring day faded into evening. As Yates held Delia close during a slow dance, he whispered in her ear, "Happy, Mrs. Quinn." "Completely," she assured him, her eyes shining in the lantern light. "I never knew such happiness was possible." "Nor I," he admitted, "and it's only the beginning." Later that night, after the guests had departed, and Elizabeth had been settled in her crib in what was now their bedroom in the main house, Yates and Delia stood on the porch where they had spent so many evenings getting to know each other. The stars blazed overhead, the air was sweet with the scent of spring, and the future stretched before them, full of promise. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Delia asked, leaning into his embrace, "when I was half conscious and terrified." "I believe I said, 'Come on now, you're almost home,'" Yates recalled, tightening his arms around her. Delia turned in his arms to face him, her expression luminous in the starlight. "You were right, though neither of us knew it then. I was almost home. I am home." "We both are," Yates agreed, lowering his lips to hers. At last. 1 year to the day after Yates found Delia fainting in the sun, they stood together on the porch of the rocking queue, watching Elizabeth take her first uncertain steps across the weathered boards. The little girl wobbled precariously, her face a study in concentration, before launching herself the final distance into her father's waiting arms. "That's my girl," Yates exclaimed, swinging her high as she giggled with delight. "Strong and determined, just like your mama." "And stubborn as your papa," Delia added, laughing as Elizabeth immediately demanded to be set down to try again. As the child toddled back toward her mother, Delia's hand moved unconsciously to rest on her stomach, where the first subtle signs of new life were beginning to show a secret she planned to share with Yates that evening. Looking at her husband and daughter silhouetted against the setting sun, Delia felt a wave of gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. From desperation to joy, from solitude to family, from a woman lost in the wilderness to the beloved mistress of the rocking queue, her journey had been remarkable by any measure. And it had all begun with a chance encounter on a dusty trail, with a compassionate cowboy who had seen not a fallen woman but a person worthy of respect and kindness. Who had looked at her, sun-struck and desperate, and said the words that would change her life forever. "Come on now, you're almost home."